Our next guest returns to us. He's been on the show once before. Nathan J. Robertson is the editor of a new magazine entitled Current Affairs, and I enjoyed it so much. I have enjoyed it, I should say, so much online that I actually went out and got a subscription, which in this day and age is a radically retro thing to do. Nathan is also a PhD student in sociology and social policy at Harvard, and he's written several recent pieces that I look forward to talking to him about. So first of all, Nathan, thank you for coming back on the program.
Well, it's very nice to be back.
Well, let's start with the big topic, the one that originally caught my eye. I have spent a little bit of time in the world a world that describes itself sometimes as techno-progressives or like pro-technology liberals. Some of them consider themselves transhumanists and so on, because I'm on the board or the advisory board of an organization that's involved in the ethical use of new technologies. And so I was particularly struck by a piece you wrote maybe a week or two ago entitled Could Death Be a Bad Thing? Which I think, first of all, is an ironic headline, if I'm perceptive enough, and the moral case for life extension. So let's talk about that for a second.
Sure.
There is as you point out, this is an oddly controversial topic, and we could talk about various reasons why it is, but there are people who feel that any attempt to radically extend life or to, in fact, eradicate death, which may be a bridge too far, but, that the very notion is somehow undemocratic or unfair because death is a natural part of life. I gather you do not agree.
No, I don't. Well, there's a couple of things. There's the unfair part, which I do consider in there, and which I do think that depending on the way in which it is done, I talk a lot about the distribution of extended life. And I think there are very serious moral questions about if you did extend people's lives and it happened in an unequal way, could it be so unfair that it would be better not to extend anybody's lives? But the part that I strongly disagree with is the idea that it would be unnatural to try and extend people's lives. And I think that idea of the natural is one that I think is I think the boundaries between the natural and unnatural are kind of arbitrary in a certain sense. And because I don't share the sort of religious or spiritual values of people who see this kind of sphere of the natural and in which mankind is not meant to dabble in, because I don't share those, and I don't think those really have any kind of rational grounding. I don't object to life extension for the reason that I think it would be unnatural to extend life. I think it's not that I think it's natural, it's that I don't think there's a clear distinction between the unnatural and natural. And I think the question should be, well, what's good for human beings? What do they want? And personally, I don't like death. I don't want to see the people that I love have to die if they don't want to. And so I think life extension is therefore a good human priority.
Well, what's interesting to me about this whole conversation is that, in fact, we do it now, and it is, in fact, unjustly applied now. That, there are neighborhoods in Boston where the life expectancy at birth is 11 years shorter than other neighborhoods in Boston that are a mile or two away. So the fact is, we extend life. Life is people on average live much longer now than they used to, and that while the gap is tightening, that is unevenly distributed by all sorts of sociological factors of race, factors of gender, and so on. So and certainly income. So
there's some evidence that actually the gap is widening. That rich people's lives are being extended at a higher rate then poor people's lives are being the life expectancy is growing, and so the gap between how long the rich and the poor are expected to live is growing. And in some places, life expectancy, I mean, the data is still kind of disputed, but life expectancy may actually be diminishing in the United States for people of certain economic classes.
Yes, I think that's correct. Life expectancy is diminishing for certain economic classes. I was referring to I think there's some ambiguity on the race gap now,
right.
But the income gap I've also heard is rising, which again proves or suggests that we are already in this future now. It's just a matter of degree, which I think is partially one of your points. As to the theological side of it, I have a friend who's a sociology professor at Trinity College, and if I recall correctly, he told me about a study showing that of all things, people who are the subset of the population that's most likely to use life-extending medical services as death approaches are in fact evangelical Christians. So it reminds me of, there was an old comedian, African-American comedian from the 60s named Flip Wilson, who used to sing a fake gospel song called Everybody Wants to Go to Heaven, but Nobody Wants to Die. And I thought of Flip Wilson when I read your piece. Is it in fact true that nobody wants to die?
I think so. I mean, I haven't consulted it's hard to know. I mean, some people say that they're perfect. They made peace with death. They're fine with it. You meet plenty of people who say they don't find the idea horrifying. I have a doctor friend though who says that everyone who says that they wouldn't live as long as they could if they were possible is lying, because he thinks as a doctor that one of the main reasons that people are okay with death is because they don't want to live as sick people or elderly people.
Right.
And so if we talk about life extension, we also have to talk about health extension, because it's one thing to say I'd like to live forever, but what does that mean? Quality of life matters just as much. But I do think that my impression is, and I think the polling on this is pretty limited, but my impression is that people, if they could live at the same quality of life as they do when they're fully healthy for much longer periods of time, nearly everybody would choose to do that if that were a choice. I mean, it hardly would get to the point where someone goes, okay, it's been 100 years, I'm still healthy, I'm still happy, I still have all my family, but I would like to die. Most of the time, people make peace with death because they feel like it's something they have to do and because their quality of life diminishes.
Well, and if you think about it, and again, we're talking with Nathan J. Robinson, the editor of Current Affairs. If you think about it, Nathan, it's something people have had to learn to do since the inception of Homo sapiens, at least. So maybe the answer is we have to unlearn to do it. Again, if we can live in relative health and comfort, and I'm not saying, I've done interviews on this program where I would have been happy to slip this mortal coil rather than finish the entire 15 minutes. But by and large, most of us, and I would say, by the way, that I'm not terribly uncomfortable with the idea of death, but I would just as soon at this moment in my life not do it. Thank you very much. So, is it about our, it may be hypothetical in the sense that we may or may not be reaching the limits of life extension. I suspect we will go much further, but we don't know. But if we do, it sounds like we're going to need not only political or economic solutions that make it justly distributed, but maybe a culture shift as well.
Yeah, so one of the things, the main things I'm talking about in the article is the idea of actually being horrified by death and not trying to reassure yourself that actually death is fine. But as you say, like it's kind of a paradox, because in a world where everybody is mortal, you need to try and restrain the impulse to not want to die, because it's not healthy. It will make you obsessed with your mortality if you think it's something that you want to transcend but you can't. That's no way to live. At the same time, unless you come to see death as what I call a bad thing, something that ought to be eliminated, it's not going to seem like something that people ought to prioritize. Life extension research is actually very limited. There's not much of it that's done. Because people they do see it as tampering with something that's natural, and don't conceive of death as a problem to be eliminated. And so I'm saying that as we go on and we develop the capacity to where maybe we could see it as a problem to be eliminated, we ought to conceive of it that way. But yeah, the inequality dimension, I think needs to come before anything else, because I'm so horrified by a world in which wealthy people could live forever and everyone else would have a very finite lifespan, precisely because I see death as such a horrifying thing in itself. And so that seems kind of the ultimate injustice to me, is taking some lives but not others.
But plus you're raising the specter of a 100,000-year-old Steve Mnuchin, which is almost...
Oh, I know. It's horrific.
Yeah. So, all right. Before I let you go, one quick change of topic, and I love this. And by the way, in closing, I would also say that whether or not we radically extend life, by having the conversation now, we are also having a conversation about equal access to medical care, which is always useful, right?
Yeah, that's kind of the thing. I want people to get to think about the issues that are involved in, what should we think of as, and one of the things I talk about in the piece is that I'm talking about death in the context of thinking about personal autonomy and getting people to live the way they want to live. So thinking about what do people want out of life? How should that be distributed justly, and how do you give it to them? So it's more a conversation about those things than it is necessarily specifically about life extension research.
Right. I couldn't agree with you more. Well said. And before I let you go, in the 2 or 3 minutes we've got left, I'm going to put you on the spot. You also wrote a really great piece on entitled "What is the Point of Political Media?" And since I do political media and you do political media, you make the point that there's a certain echo chamber effect here. You say, Democratic Socialists read Jacobin, alt-righters read Breitbart, Stalinists read Counterpunch, and hey, I've written for Counterpunch. Wait a minute. But
sorry, that was a little bit. That was a joke.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, you'll be laughing in the gulag, pal. But
I know.
Is it a useful and/or honorable profession we are engaged in?
Yeah, and I think it's useful. I often phrase articles with titles that mislead people into thinking what my position will actually be. So the title is "What's the Point of Political Media?" But the answer is that I think political media is very important and is underappreciated, and that I think the right has appreciated in a way that the left has not. Right? Fox News has an effect on people's voting patterns, has an effect on people's ideology. Media is persuasive. It shapes who we are and our understandings of the world. And I actually say that the echo chamber idea is a little limited because an echo chamber implies that I have beliefs, I go and find the news sources that confirm my beliefs, and pretty much the media is not doing anything except telling me what I want to hear. That's not my understanding of media. My understanding of media is that it has a kind of persuasive effect, that by putting ideas into the world and spreading them, even if it's hard to measure, I think political media has a very strong effect in the aggregate.
Well, and it also, I would say, it has an effect of disseminating information and opinions that, selfishly, if I'm talking about left media, I think are more accurate. I also think it has a kind of social effect of letting people know they're not alone, creating a sense of community, coherence, optimism. I think these are things that are important too. And along that line, you wrote, interesting thought here. You write, because so many on the left are materialists, many of them are skeptical of the power of ideas. I don't know if that's true, but it's a very interesting thought. I wonder if that's the case. I think it may be, but I also wonder whether many in the institutional liberal world are uncomfortable with an independent left because, unlike the independent right media, the independent left media may challenge the assumptions that they share and they count on to perpetuate themselves.
No, I think you're absolutely right there. There's one other thing that's worth identifying, which is I think that a lot of people on the left, or at least on the kind of left I want to be on, are critical of the idea of propaganda. Right? You don't want to do propaganda. So if the idea, you don't want to put together a Breitbart of the left, or a Fox News of the left, because if you think, well, media affects public perceptions through a kind of brainwashing process, to say, well, I think we need to do what they do, is kind of in tension with left principles, which and so if you're thinking about media as something that has an unconscious effect on people, you almost want to simultaneously take advantage of that, but also kind of work to reduce it. If people read current affairs articles and they're all persuaded by them, I'm kind of dubious, because I don't necessarily want us to be a propaganda outlet, because it's bad if people are persuaded by propaganda.
Right. No, I agree. And I try, by the way, I fail constantly. I try not to generate propaganda, but I do a lot, I think. I try, I think it's nice to give people information and ideas that they might not get otherwise, and be open about one's biases, and then just say, draw your own conclusions. Here's what I've drawn out of all of this. That's the ideal world to me.
No, I think that's completely right.
And unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there. But as I said in my introduction to you, I have subscribed to Current Affairs because the one other thing you guys do that a lot of left media doesn't do is you have fun. And I think it's really important to have fun. I think, it's just so dreary otherwise. So
it's a very depressing world. So you don't want to make people more depressed. You want to bring them some relief.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you guys do a good job of that. So unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there. But Nathan J. Robinson, who is studying sociology and social policy for his PhD and is the editor of Current Affairs magazine, thanks for coming on the program.
Thanks so much for having me.